Some betrayals cut so deep they carve out a new person entirely. And that person knows exactly how to make the betrayer bleed. The rain hammered against Julia's apartment window like angry fists. Each drop served as a reminder of the storm that had been brewing inside her for 3 months. She sat in the darkness, her phone glowing in her trembling hands. The voice memo that changed everything still echoed in her mind. 27 seconds. That's all it took to shatter 3 years of marriage and birth something darker, something hungrier for justice. Her reflection stared back at her from the black window. Hollow eyes, bruised throat barely visible in the dim light, and a smile that would have terrified her just hours ago. But she wasn't the same woman who had fallen asleep next to him last night. That woman was naive, broken, desperate for love. This woman had a plan. The wedding ring sat on the coffee table like a discarded lie, its diamond catching the occasional flash of lightning. Tomorrow he would wake up to find her gone. But that would only be the beginning, because what he said about her in that voice memo, what he really thought of her, what he'd been telling his mistress behind her back, that required something far more devastating than just disappearing. She picked up her laptop and began to type. The first email would go out at exactly 9 a.m. The second at noon. By evening, everyone would know who Jacob Davis really was. And by the time she was finished, he would understand that some women don't just break. They become unbreakable and infinitely more dangerous. The thunder rolled overhead as she smiled into the darkness. He had no idea what was coming. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more tales of life. Enjoy listening. 2 years earlier, Julia thought she was living in a fairy tale. You're going to love this place, Julia, Jacob said, his arm wrapped around her waist as they stood in the doorway of what would become their first home together on Magnolia Street in Seattle. The morning sun streamed through bay windows, painting everything in golden light, their sanctuary as newlyweds. She leaned into his warmth, breathing in his familiar cologne, cedar, and something distinctly him. After a whirlwind romance and quick engagement, they were finally settling into married life in the Pacific Northwest. It's perfect, she whispered, and she meant it. The hardwood floors gleamed. The Kit Davis had marble countertops that reflected the light beautifully, and the bedroom had a view of Elliott Bay that took her breath away. Jacob spun her around, his brown eyes sparkling with the same excitement she felt bubbling in her chest. Perfect for my perfect wife, he said, pressing his forehead against hers. I can't believe we're finally doing this. Neither could she. After 6 months of intense dating, a romantic proposal, and a small ceremony, it felt surreal to be standing in their home, their space, their future. The first few months were everything she had dreamed marriage would be. Jacob would surprise her with coffee in bed, his dark hair still messy from sleep, that crooked smile that had made her fall for him at a wine bar spreading across his face. They'd cook dinner together, his hands guiding hers as he taught her to make his mother's stir-fry. They'd fall asleep tangled together on the couch while watching old movies, and she'd wake up with his jacket draped over her shoulders. I love you, Julia Castellano. He'd whisper into her hair during those quiet moments, and her heart would flutter like it was the first time he'd ever said it. But fairy tales, she learned, have a way of revealing their true nature when you're not paying attention. The changes started small, so small she convinced herself she was imagining them. You're wearing that to dinner? Jacob asked one evening as she emerged from the bedroom in a floral dress she'd always loved. Pink with tiny white roses, something that made her feel bright and happy. She looked down at herself, suddenly self-conscious. What's wrong with it? Nothing's wrong, he said quickly, but his eyes lingered on the dress with something that looked like disappointment. It's just, we're going to Canlis. It's an upscale place. Maybe something a little more sophisticated. She changed into a black cocktail dress, the kind that made her feel like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. But Jacob's face lit up when he saw her, and he pulled her close for a kiss that tasted like approval. There's my beautiful wife, he murmured against her lips, and the words still sent shivers through her. They'd only been married 8 months, and she still felt giddy when he called her that. At dinner, he ordered for both of them without asking what she wanted. When she mentioned it later, he laughed and said he was just trying to take care of her. You always take forever to decide anyway, he said, squeezing her hand across the table. I know what you like. But he'd ordered halibut, and she hated halibut. She ate it anyway, smiling and nodding as he talked about his new promotion at the tech startup, about the clients he was impressing, about the future he was building for them. The comments about her appearance became more frequent. Her hair was too long, then too short when she cut it. Her makeup was too dramatic for day, too subtle for evening. The clothes she'd worn confidently for years suddenly seemed wrong through his eyes. Too casual, too formal, too bright, too boring. I'm just trying to help you put your best foot forward, he'd say when she'd get quiet after his suggestions. You're so beautiful, Julia. I want everyone to see what I see. But she was starting to wonder what exactly he saw when he looked at her. The first time he raised his voice, she was so shocked, she actually stepped backward. Are you serious right now? He snapped, his face flushing red as he stared at the credit card statement in his hand. $300 at Nordstrom. What the hell did you even buy? Clothes, she said, her voice smaller than she intended. And some things for the house. Towels. We already have towels, Julia. We don't need to waste money on things we don't need. He threw the statement on the counter, and she flinched at the sound. I'm working my ass off to build this company, and you're just throwing money away. I'm sorry, she said automatically, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. I didn't think. That's the problem, he said. But his voice was softer now, and he reached for her hands. You don't think about how these things affect us, affect our future. His thumbs rubbed circles on her palms, and she felt herself relaxing despite the knot in her stomach. I'm not mad at you, baby. I'm just stressed about the startup. You understand, right? She nodded because she did understand. He was working 18-hour days trying to get his company off the ground. The pressure was getting to him. It wasn't really about the money. It was about the stress. But the next week, when she bought groceries with cash from her own account, he still found something to criticize. The bread was the wrong brand. The milk was too expensive. She was being wasteful, careless, thoughtless. Maybe you should make a list before you go, he suggested, his arm around her shoulders as they put the groceries away. Plan out the meals for the week. That way, you'll only buy what we actually need. So she made lists, detailed, organized lists that accounted for every meal, every snack, every household item they might need. She showed them to Jacob before she went shopping, and he'd nod approvingly and kiss her forehead. See, you're getting so much better at this, he'd say, and the praise would warm her from the inside out. But even with the lists, there was always something wrong. She bought the wrong brand of pasta sauce, not the one his mother used. She forgot to get the specific type of coffee he liked. She picked up bananas that were too ripe, too green, too expensive. It's like you're not even trying, he said one evening after she'd apparently bought the wrong kind of cheese for the lasagna he wanted to make. I asked for one simple thing, and you can't even get that right. The words hit her like a slap, and she felt tears prick at her eyes. I am trying, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm trying so hard, Jacob. His expression softened immediately, and he pulled her into his arms. Hey, I'm sorry, he murmured into her hair. I didn't mean that. I'm just tired and I took it out on you. That's not fair. She melted into his embrace, relief flooding through her. This was the Jacob she'd fallen in love with. Gentle, apologetic, caring. The other Jacob, the one who snapped and criticized and made her feel small, that wasn't really him. That was just stress. Just the pressure of his startup. Just the adjustment period of early marriage. I love you, he whispered, and she whispered it back, meaning it with every fiber of her being. But as the weeks passed, the gentle Jacob appeared less and less frequently. The other Jacob, the one who found fault with everything she did, who made her second-guess every decision, who looked at her like she was a disappointment he was trying to fix, became the norm. She started walking on eggshells, analyzing every word before she spoke, every action before she took it. Would this make him angry? Would this disappoint him? Was she being thoughtless again, careless again, not good enough again? Her friends started commenting on how quiet she'd become when they went out. You okay, Julia? Her best friend Carmen asked one night when they met for drinks. You seem different. I'm fine, she said automatically, the response she'd perfected over the past few months. Just tired from work. But Carmen's dark eyes studied her face with the intensity of someone who'd known her since college. Are you happy? With Jacob? With the marriage? The question caught her off guard, and for a moment, she didn't know how to answer. Was she happy? She loved Jacob. She was married to him. They were building a life together. Of course she was happy. Yes, she said, but the word felt strange in her mouth. Of course I'm happy. Why would you ask that? Carmen shrugged, but her expression remained concerned. You just seem smaller lately, like you're trying to take up less space. Her words haunted Julia for days. Was she smaller? Was she trying to take up less space? She found herself studying her reflection in the mirror, looking for signs of the person she used to be. The woman who'd graduated magna cum laude from University of Washington, who'd landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm, who'd once been confident enough to approach Jacob at a networking event and strike up a conversation. Where had she gone? The answer came to her slowly, in pieces, like a puzzle she didn't want to solve. She'd been disappearing bit by bit, criticism by criticism, correction by correction. Every time Jacob told her she was wrong, she became a little less sure of herself. Every time he fixed something she'd done, she became a little more dependent on his approval. But she pushed the thought away. This was normal, wasn't it? Marriage required compromise, adjustment, growth. Jacob was helping her become a better version of herself, more organized, more thoughtful, more considerate of their shared future. The bruises started 6 months before the voice memo that would change everything. The first one was an accident. At least that's what she told herself. They were arguing about something trivial, something she couldn't even remember now, and she turned to walk away. Jacob grabbed her wrist to stop her, his fingers digging into her skin with a desperation that surprised them both. Don't walk away from me when I'm talking to you, he said, his voice low and dangerous in a way she'd never heard before. She looked down at his hand on her wrist, at the white marks his fingers were leaving on her skin, and something cold settled in her stomach. You're hurting me, she said quietly. He released her immediately, his face cycling through shock, guilt, and something that might have been fear. God, Julia, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. He ran his hands through his hair, and when he looked at her again, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm so sorry. I would never hurt you. You know that, right? She nodded because she did know that Jacob loved her. He would never hurt her on purpose. It was an accident, a moment of frustration that got out of hand. But the bruises on her wrist told a different story. 5 small dark marks that bloomed purple and yellow over the next few days. She covered them with long sleeves and bracelets, and when Jacob saw her doing it, his face crumpled with guilt. I hate myself for that, he said, pulling her into his arms. I hate that I hurt you, even accidentally. It will never happen again. I promise. And she believed him because the alternative, that the man she loved, the man she was married to, had hurt her on purpose, was too terrible to consider. But promises, she learned, are easier to make than to keep. The second time, he said she'd provoked him. She'd been asking him about some late nights at the office, and when she followed him into the living room to continue the conversation, he spun around so quickly that his elbow caught her in the ribs. Maybe if you didn't follow me around like a lost puppy, these things wouldn't happen, he said, but his voice was gentle, almost sad. I need space to breathe, Julia. When you crowd me like that, I get claustrophobic. So she learned to give him space. She learned to let arguments die rather than follow him when he walked away. She learned to swallow her words, to bite her tongue, to make herself smaller and quieter and less likely to provoke him. The third time, there was no excuse, no accident, no provocation, no explanation that made sense. She'd simply questioned him about a charge on their credit card for an expensive restaurant she'd never been to. And he'd backhanded her across the face so quickly she didn't see it coming. The sound echoed through their apartment like a gunshot, and they both froze, staring at each other in shock. Her cheek burned, and she could taste blood where her teeth had cut her lip. Julia, he breathed, reaching for her, but she stepped back instinctively. Don't, she said, her voice shaking. Don't touch me. Baby, please, I didn't mean, you hit me. The words felt surreal coming out of her mouth. You hit me, Jacob. His face crumpled, and he sank onto the couch like his legs couldn't support him anymore. I know, he whispered. I know, and I hate myself for it. I don't know what's wrong with me. The stress at work, the pressure, it's making me crazy. He looked up at her with those brown eyes she'd once thought were beautiful, and now they were filled with tears and desperation and something that looked like genuine remorse. I'll get help, he said. I'll talk to someone, figure out how to manage the stress better. This isn't who I am, Julia. You know this isn't who I am. And she wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. Because if this wasn't who he was, then maybe they could fix it. Maybe they could go back to being the couple who cooked dinner together and fell asleep watching movies and whispered, "I love you," in the dark. "Okay," she said finally, and his face flooded with relief. "Okay, get help," she said. "Talk to someone. And if you ever hit me again, I won't," he said quickly. "I swear to you, Julia, I will never lay a hand on you again." But even as he said it, even as she nodded and let him pull her into his arms, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that promises from men who hit the women they claim to love aren't worth the breath they're spoken with. She should have listened to that voice. She should have packed her bags that night and never looked back. But she stayed. She stayed because she loved him. She stayed because she believed he could change. She stayed because leaving felt like admitting that the last 3 years of her life had been a lie, and she wasn't ready to face that truth. But the truth has a way of revealing itself whether you're ready or not. And 6 months later, it would arrive in the form of a voice memo that Jacob never meant for her to hear. The night that changed everything started like any other. Jacob was working late again. Or at least that's what he told her. She'd stopped asking too many questions about his schedule months ago after he'd snapped at her for being clingy and suspicious. She was curled up on their couch, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold on the coffee table beside her, trying to focus on the book in her lap. But the words kept blurring together, her mind wandering to the conversation they'd had that morning. "I might be late tonight," Jacob had said, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. The morning light caught the sharp line of his jaw, and for a moment, he looked like the man she'd fallen in love with at that networking event. "Big client presentation tomorrow. The team wants to run through it one more time." "Okay," she'd said because that's what she always said. "I'll keep dinner warm for you." He'd kissed her forehead, a brief, distracted press of lips that felt more like habit than affection. "Don't wait up. This could go really late." So she hadn't waited up. She'd eaten dinner alone, cleaned the Kit Davis alone, and settled in with her book alone. The silence in their apartment felt heavy, oppressive in a way it never used to. There was a time when she'd enjoyed quiet evenings by herself, but now they just reminded her of how isolated she'd become. Her phone buzzed on the cushion beside her, and she glanced at it, expecting to see a text from Jacob. Instead, it was a notification for a voice memo from Jacob. Her heart did a little skip of happiness. Maybe he was thinking of her after all. Maybe he'd sent her a sweet message to brighten her evening the way he used to when they were dating. She picked up the phone and hit play without really looking at the details. Jacob's voice filled the quiet apartment, but something was wrong immediately. He sounded different, relaxed in a way he never was with her anymore, his voice carrying the easy warmth she remembered from their early days together. "Hey, Valentina," he said, and her blood turned to ice. Valentina, a woman's name she didn't recognize. This wasn't meant for her. She should have stopped listening, should have hung up immediately and pretended she'd never heard it. But something in his tone, something casual and unguarded, kept her frozen in place. "So I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," Jacob continued, and she could hear the sound of traffic in the background. He was walking somewhere, probably from his office to whatever bar he was meeting his coworkers at. "About Julia, I mean." Her name on his lips made her stomach clench. What had this Valentina said about her? Who was she? "You're right," Jacob said, and his voice carried a note of resignation that made her hands start to shake. She's not who I thought she was when I married her. Hell, she's not who I thought she was when we moved in together." The book slipped from her numb fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. "I mean, don't get me wrong," Jacob continued, oblivious to the fact that his words were tearing her world apart. "She's sweet. She tries so hard to please me. It's almost pathetic sometimes. But that's just it. She's pathetic. She has no backbone, no opinions of her own anymore. It's like living with a ghost." "A ghost?" He thought she was a ghost. "Remember how she used to be when we first met?" Jacob's voice took on a wistful quality that made her want to scream. She was so confident, so sure of herself. She'd debate politics at parties, challenge my ideas, call me out when I was being an ass. I was attracted to that strength. Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and silent. She wanted to turn off the phone, to stop this torture, but she couldn't move. She had to hear it all. But now, God, she asks my permission for everything. What to wear, what to eat, what to watch on TV. She's turned herself into this perfect little housewife who never disagrees with me about anything. And the worst part is, I think I did that to her." There was a pause, and she could hear him sigh heavily. "I know I've been difficult lately. The stress at work, the pressure to get the company to the next level. I've been taking it out on her, and she just takes it. She apologizes for things that aren't her fault. Walks on eggshells around me. Flinches when I move too fast. Christ, I made her flinch, Valentina. What kind of man does that make me? The kind who hits women," she thought bitterly. "The kind who breaks them down piece by piece until they're shadows of who they used to be." "But here's the thing," Jacob continued, and his voice hardened in a way that made her blood run cold. "I can't respect someone who won't stand up for themselves. I can't love someone who's so desperate for my approval that they'll change everything about themselves to get it. It's disgusting, honestly." She was disgusting to him. "So yeah, you're right. I need to make a choice. I can't keep living this lie, pretending I'm satisfied with what my marriage has become. Julia deserves better than someone who's lost all respect for her, and I deserve to be with someone who challenges me, who excites me." He paused. "Someone like you." The voice memo continued, and she heard Jacob's voice drop to a more intimate tone. "I can't stop thinking about last weekend at your place. The way you looked at me, the way you made me feel alive again. I haven't felt that way in my own home in months." Last weekend, when he'd told her he was at a work retreat. "I know this is complicated," Jacob continued. "I know ending my marriage isn't going to be simple, but I can't keep pretending anymore. I can't keep living with someone I don't respect, can't keep sleeping next to someone who bores me to tears." The voice memo ended with the sound of a door opening, voices in the background, and then a soft beep that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of their apartment. She sat there for a long time, staring at her phone, trying to process what she'd just heard. 27 seconds. That's all it had taken to destroy 3 years of marriage, to reveal the truth she'd been too blind or too desperate to see. Jacob didn't love her. He didn't even respect her. She was pathetic to him, disgusting, a ghost of the woman she used to be. And he was having an affair, not just planning to leave her, but actively betraying her with someone named Valentina, someone who apparently made him feel alive in ways she no longer could. The rage that filled her then was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. It started as a cold knot in her stomach and spread outward like poison, burning through her veins until every cell in her body was screaming for justice. He'd done this to her. He'd systematically torn down her confidence, her independence, her sense of self until she was exactly what he described, a pathetic ghost who lived for his approval. And now he had the audacity to be disgusted by his own handiwork while cheating on her with someone else. She thought about all the times she'd apologized for things that weren't her fault, all the times she'd changed her clothes because he didn't like them, all the times she'd swallowed her words, her opinions, her very self because she was so desperate to keep him happy. She thought about the bruises she'd hidden, the excuses she'd made, the friends she'd stopped seeing because Jacob didn't like them. She thought about the woman she used to be, confident, opinionated, strong, and how completely she'd disappeared. But she wasn't gone, she realized. She was just buried under months of manipulation and abuse. And now, listening to Jacob's casual cruelty, she could feel her clawing her way back to the surface. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jacob. "Working late. Don't wait up." She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Okay, love you." But as she hit send, she was already planning. Because Jacob Davis had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the woman he'd tried so hard to destroy. He thought she was weak, pathetic, broken beyond repair. He thought she'd fall apart when he left her, that she'd beg him to stay, that she'd blame herself for not being good enough. He had no idea that some women don't break, they transform. And the woman he'd created through months of psychological torture and infidelity was about to show him exactly what she was capable of. She picked up her laptop and began to research. Jacob's company, his co-workers, his clients, his social media accounts, his family, his friends, every detail of the life he'd built, the reputation he was so proud of, the future he was planning without her. And this Valentina, whoever she was, Julia was going to find her too. By the time he came home at 2 a.m., reeking of perfume that wasn't hers and barely able to walk straight, she was ready. "Hey baby," he slurred, stumbling into the bedroom where she was pretending to sleep. Sorry I'm so late. You know how it is. I know exactly how it is, she murmured into her pillow, but he was already passed out beside her, snoring loudly. She lay awake for the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling, perfecting her plan. By morning, she had every detail mapped out, every move calculated, every consequence considered. Jacob Davis thought he knew her, thought he'd broken her down into something manageable and disposable. He was about to learn how wrong he was. She woke up before dawn, her body moving with a purpose she hadn't felt in months. Jacob was still unconscious beside her, his face slack with sleep and alcohol, completely unaware that the woman lying next to him was no longer the broken creature he'd been planning to discard. The first step was the hardest, leaving. Not because she would miss him. God, no. But because walking away meant acknowledging that the last 3 years of her life had been built on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. It meant admitting that she'd lost herself so completely that she'd become unrecognizable even to herself. But as she moved quietly through their apartment, gathering the few things that were truly hers, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: clarity. She packed light, a suitcase with enough clothes for a week, her laptop, important documents, and the small jewelry box her grandmother had left her, the only thing in this apartment that Jacob had never criticized or tried to change. Everything else could stay. The furniture they'd picked out together, the Kit Davis gadgets he'd insisted they needed, the wedding ring that had once represented her dreams. It was all tainted now, contaminated by the truth of what their marriage really was. She left the ring on his nightstand where he'd see it immediately upon waking. No note, no explanation, just the white gold band that had once made her feel chosen, special, loved. Now it looked like what it had always been, a beautiful lie. Her hands were steady as she called a cab, her voice calm as she gave the driver the address of the extended stay hotel she'd booked online. She'd paid for a month in advance using the credit card Jacob didn't know about, the one she'd opened secretly after he'd started monitoring their joint account so closely. The old Julia would have felt guilty about the deception. This Julia felt nothing but satisfaction. As the cab pulled away from Magnolia Street, she allowed herself one look back at the building that had been her prison for the past 2 years. Jacob was probably still sleeping off his hangover and his night with Valentina, blissfully unaware that his pathetic wife had just walked out of his life forever. But leaving was only the beginning. The hotel room was small but clean, with a view of the city that reminded her of possibilities rather than limitations. She set up her laptop on the small desk and began phase 2 of her plan: research. Jacob Davis, 31, co-founder and CTO of Nextech Solutions, graduate of Stanford Business School, son of David and Linda Davis of Bellevue, Washington. She knew most of these facts already, but now she was looking at them through different eyes. Not as the loving wife who was proud of his accomplishments, but as someone who understood that reputation was everything to a man like Jacob. His career, his social standing, his carefully cultivated image of success. These were the things he valued most. These were the things she was going to destroy. She started with his company. Nextech Solutions prided itself on innovation, integrity, and inclusive leadership. Their website featured glossy photos of diverse employees, testimonials about work-life balance, and a prominent section about their zero-tolerance policy for harassment and unethical conduct. How interesting. She spent the morning crafting emails, not angry, emotional rants that could be dismissed as the ravings of a bitter ex-wife, but carefully worded, professional communications that painted a picture of a man whose private behavior was completely at odds with the company's stated values. The first email went to Jacob's business partner and co-founder, James Rodriguez, whose LinkedIn profile showed him posing with his wife and 3 daughters at a company family day. Dear Mr. Rodriguez, I hope this email finds you well. My name is Julia Castellano, and until this morning, I was married to your business partner, Jacob Davis. I'm writing to inform you of some concerning behavior that I believe conflicts with Nextech Solutions' stated commitment to ethical conduct and employee integrity. Over the past 2 years, Mr. Davis has engaged in a pattern of psychological and physical abuse that has escalated significantly in recent months. I have documentation of these incidents, including photographs of injuries and evidence of extramarital affairs conducted during work hours. While I understand that personal matters don't always reflect on professional conduct, I felt it was important to bring this to your attention given the nature of Mr. Davis's role in company leadership and his representation of your organization's values. I am not seeking any specific action at this time, merely ensuring that you have all relevant information about a business partner who regularly interacts with clients, employees, and investors. I trust you will handle this information with the discretion and seriousness it deserves. Sincerely, Julia Castellano. She attached a single photograph, one she'd taken of the bruises on her wrist after the first accident. She'd told herself at the time that she was documenting it for her own peace of mind, never imagining she'd actually use it. But the old Julia had been smarter than she'd given herself credit for. The second email went to the HR department, with copies to several key investors whose email addresses she'd found through LinkedIn and company press releases. The third went to the client Jacob had been bragging about landing, a women's nonprofit organization focused on workplace equality. By noon, she'd sent 15 carefully crafted emails to various people in Jacob's professional orbit. Not enough to seem like a coordinated attack, but enough to ensure that whispers would start circulating. Questions would be asked. His reputation would begin to crack. But she wasn't done. Not even close. Phase 3 required more investigation, and that meant finding Valentina. She started with Jacob's social media accounts, looking for clues. His Instagram was carefully curated professional success, mixed with strategic glimpses of their seemingly happy marriage. But as she scrolled through recent posts, she noticed something interesting. Several photos at business events featured the same woman in the background, tall, blonde, always perfectly dressed, always positioned just close enough to Jacob to suggest familiarity, but not so close as to raise suspicions. A reverse image search led her to Valentina Morrison, 28, Senior Marketing Director at Pinnacle Communications, a company that had done several campaigns for Nextech Solutions. Her LinkedIn showed she was divorced, had an MBA from USC, and specialized in strategic partnerships. Strategic partnerships. That was one way to put it. Julia spent the afternoon building a comprehensive profile of her husband's mistress. Valentina lived in a luxury condo downtown, drove a BMW, and frequented expensive restaurants, many of the same restaurants where Jacob claimed to be having client dinners. But the most valuable information came from Valentina's own social media. She was careless with her privacy settings, and her Instagram stories from the past few months painted a clear picture of an ongoing affair. Photos of expensive gifts with no tagged source. Pictures from high-end hotels during times when Jacob had claimed to be traveling for work. Most damning of all, a selfie from the previous weekend at a wine bar, with Jacob clearly visible in the reflection of her sunglasses, his wedding ring conspicuously absent. Julia screenshot everything, building a digital trail of evidence that would be impossible to deny. By evening, her phone was buzzing constantly with calls and texts from people who'd seen her social media updates. She'd changed her relationship status from married to single, removed all photos with Jacob, and posted a simple status update. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from what's destroying you. The comments started pouring in immediately. Friends who'd noticed she'd seemed different lately. Family members who'd never quite warmed to Jacob. College acquaintances who remembered the confident woman she used to be. "Are you okay, honey?" her cousin Maria wrote. "If you need anything, I'm here." "So proud of you for putting yourself first," commented her old roommate from college. "You deserve so much better." "About time," wrote Carmen, and she could practically hear the relief in her voice, even through the screen. She responded to each comment with grace and gratitude, never mentioning Jacob by name, never airing dirty laundry in public. But the message was clear. She had left him, and the people who knew her best were relieved. The contrast would be stark when Jacob's friends and family started asking questions. When they looked at her social media and saw the outpouring of support, the obvious relief of people who cared about her. When they started to wonder what they'd missed, what signs they'd ignored. By 10 o'clock that evening, her phone rang. Jacob's name flashed on the screen, and she let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was exactly what she expected, confusion masquerading as concern, with an undertone of irritation that she'd dared to inconvenience him. "Julia, what the hell? I wake up and you're gone. Your ring is on the nightstand and you won't answer your phone. Look, I know we've been having some problems lately, but this is crazy. Just call me back, okay? We can work this out. We always do. We always do." As if their working things out hadn't always meant her apologizing, her changing, her shrinking herself down to fit his expectations. She deleted the voicemail without listening to it again. The second call came 20 minutes later. This time she answered. Julia, thank God. Where are you? Are you okay? His voice was different now. Higher, more frantic. The emails had probably started reaching their targets. I'm fine, Jacob, she said, her voice calm and steady. Better than I've been in months, actually. What's going on? Why did you leave? And why the hell are people from my company calling me asking about? He stopped abruptly. Asking about what? She prompted sweetly. You know what? He said, and now his voice carried the edge she knew so well. What did you tell them, Julia? I told them the truth. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. She could practically hear him calculating, trying to figure out how much damage she could do, how much she actually knew. The truth, he finally said, and he was trying for his old charming tone, the one that used to make her melt. Come on, baby. You're upset. I get it. We've both been under a lot of stress lately. But don't you think you're being a little dramatic? Dramatic? There was the word she'd been waiting for. The one he always used when she dared to have feelings he didn't approve of. Am I being dramatic, Jacob? Or am I finally being honest? Honest about what? We had some fights, sure, but every couple, you hit me, she said quietly, and the words hung in the air like a blade. Another silence, longer this time. That was an accident, he said finally. You know that was an accident. I would never. Which time? She interrupted. The first time when you grabbed my wrist so hard you left bruises? The second time when your elbow just happened to catch my ribs? Or the third time when you backhanded me across the face? I have pictures, Jacob. Time-stamped photos that show exactly when each incident occurred. This was partially true. She had the photos from the first incident, and her phone had backup logs that could corroborate the timeline. But that's not even the worst part, is it? She continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. The worst part is Valentina. She heard his sharp intake of breath and knew the blow had landed. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice was weak. Really? Because I have your voice memo, Jacob. The one you accidentally sent me instead of to your mistress. 27 seconds of you talking about how pathetic and disgusting I am. How you can't respect someone like me. How Valentina makes you feel alive in ways I never could. The silence was deafening now. I also have photos, she continued. Lots of photos. Of you two together at restaurants, hotels, events. Photos that show timestamps and locations that directly contradict the lies you've been telling me about your whereabouts. Photos that show you without your wedding ring while you're with her. Julia, please, please what? Please don't destroy your perfect life built on lies and abuse and adultery. Please don't make you face consequences for what you've done. Look, he said, and now he was in full damage control mode. I know I haven't been perfect. The stress at work, the pressure, it's been making me crazy. But I love you, Julia. We can get through this. I'll end things with, I'll get help. You'll what? Go to therapy? Promise to change? Tell me how sorry you are and how it'll never happen again. She laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut. I've heard this song before, Jacob. But here's the thing. I also heard the song you sang to Valentina about how disgusting you find me, how you can't wait to be rid of me. That wasn't. I didn't mean. You meant every word, she said firmly. And you know what? You were right about one thing. I did become pathetic. I did lose myself. I did turn into someone unrecognizable. But not anymore. So what? You're just going to destroy my career over some relationship problems? That's insane, Julia. That's vindictive. That's not who you are. You're right, she said. The woman you've been living with for the past 2 years isn't vindictive. She's pathetic and desperate and so broken down that she disgusts even the man who claims to love her while fucking someone else behind her back. She heard his sharp intake of breath at her language. The old Julia never swore. But here's the thing, Jacob, she continued. That woman isn't who I really am. She's who you made me. And now that I remember who I actually am, I find that I'm very interested in making sure you face some consequences for what you've done. To me, and to Valentina's marriage, and to everyone else who trusted you. Julia, please. Good night, Jacob. Oh, and don't bother trying to find me. I'm somewhere you'll never think to look. Somewhere safe where I can think clearly for the first time in months. She hung up before he could respond and immediately blocked his number. Then she opened her laptop and began phase 4. The next morning brought exactly what she'd hoped for: chaos. She woke up to 23 missed calls from Jacob's various phone numbers: his cell, his office line, even his parents' house phone. He'd clearly been desperate enough to involve his family, which meant the panic was setting in. But more importantly, her carefully planted seeds were beginning to sprout. The first sign came in the form of a LinkedIn notification. Jacob had been tagged in a post by someone from a partner company, a group photo from a networking event with the caption, "Celebrating our amazing partners who embody excellence in business ethics." But Jacob's face had been conspicuously cropped out of the image, and several comments mentioned recent concerns about his conduct. She made herself coffee in the hotel's tiny kit d'Avizette and settled in to watch the show unfold. By 10 a.m., Jacob had created a new phone number and was calling her from that. She let it go to voicemail, then listened to his increasingly frantic messages. "Julia, I know you're getting these. James called me into his office this morning. They're considering removing me from the company." "Removing me, Julia? From the company I helped build? Do you understand what this means for my career?" She understood perfectly. It meant everything was going according to plan. The next message was angrier. "This is insane. You can't just destroy someone's life because you're upset about marital problems. I have rights, Julia. I have a reputation to protect." The irony was delicious. Jacob Davis, who had spent 2 years systematically destroying her sense of self while carrying on an affair, was outraged that someone might damage his reputation. But the third message was different. His voice was smaller, more vulnerable, and for a moment, he sounded like the man she'd fallen in love with at that wine bar. "Please, Julia. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But this is going to ruin everything I've worked for. Can't we just talk? Can't we figure this out like adults?" Like adults. As if hitting your wife was adult behavior. As if cheating on her was a mature way to handle marital problems. She deleted the messages and checked her email. The responses were better than she'd dared to hope. James Rodriguez had written back personally, thanking her for bringing the matter to their attention and assuring her that Next Tech Solutions took such allegations very seriously. The investors had sent formal acknowledgments of her complaints and requests for additional documentation. But the most satisfying response came from the women's nonprofit Jacob had been courting as a client. Their executive director, Dr. Sarah Martinez, had written a lengthy email expressing her shock and disappointment. She'd also mentioned that they would be terminating their contract with Next Tech Solutions immediately and would be sharing their concerns with other organizations in their network. Jacob's golden client was slipping through his fingers. But the real fireworks came from an unexpected source: Valentina Morrison herself. Julia's phone rang at noon with a Seattle number she didn't recognize. "Is this Julia Castellano?" The voice was polished, professional, but there was an undercurrent of panic. "Yes, this is Julia. This is Valentina Morrison. I think we need to talk." Julia's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "I think we do too. Can you meet me today? There's a coffee shop on Pine Street called Victrola. 1 o'clock? I'll be there." The coffee shop was busy with the lunch crowd, but she spotted Valentina immediately. She was sitting in a corner booth, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the obvious stress evident in her posture. Up close, she was even more beautiful than her photos suggested, but there was something brittle about her composure that suggested she was barely holding it together. "Julia," she said as she approached the table, "thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." She slid into the booth across from her, studying her face carefully. "I have to admit, I'm curious why Jacob's mistress wants to meet with his wife." Valentina flinched at the word mistress, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, placing it on the table between them. "Because I just found out I wasn't the only one," she said quietly. Julia felt her blood run cold. "What do you mean?" "I mean there are others. At least 2 other women that I know of. Maybe more." Valentina's voice was shaking now. God, I'm so stupid. I thought I was special. I thought he was leaving his marriage for me because we had something real." She scrolled through her phone and showed Julia a series of photos. Jacob with different women at different times, all in intimate settings, all clearly more than professional relationships. "I hired a private investigator," Valentina continued. "After I saw your social media posts, after people started asking me questions about my relationship with Jacob, I needed to know the truth. And the truth is that Jacob Davis is a serial cheater who has been manipulating multiple women for years. Julia stared at the photos, feeling sick. She'd known about Valentina, but she hadn't considered that there might be others. Jacob hadn't just betrayed their marriage once. He'd been systematically deceiving her for months, maybe years. There's more, Valentina said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. The investigator found financial records. Jacob has been stealing from the company, siphoning money into personal accounts. He's been using company funds to pay for his affairs, the hotels, the gifts, the dinners. He's embezzled at least $200,000 over the past 18 months. Julia felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Jacob wasn't just an abusive husband and serial cheater. He was a criminal. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Valentina was quiet for a moment, then looked up at her with tears in her eyes. Because I'm married too, she said. Was married. My husband found out about the affair yesterday and filed for divorce. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that I'm not the victim here. You are. She reached across the table and touched Julia's hand gently. I thought I was helping Jacob escape an unhappy marriage. He told me you were cold, distant, that you'd grown apart, that you barely spoke anymore. He painted you as someone who'd given up on life, on love, on everything that mattered. Julia felt tears prick at her eyes. Even in his affair, Jacob had been rewriting the narrative to make her the villain. But looking at your photos from before, talking to people who know you, seeing how your friends have rallied around you, I realized he was lying about you the same way he was lying to you about me. He was creating a story that justified his behavior, making us both complicit in hurting each other. Valentina pulled out a flash drive and placed it on the table. This contains everything the investigator found. Photos, financial records, communications with the other women, evidence of the embezzlement. I'm giving it to you because you deserve to know the whole truth, and because Jacob needs to face consequences for what he's done. Not just to you, but to all of us. Julia stared at the flash drive, hardly able to process what she was being offered. You're willing to testify? To go on record? I'm willing to do whatever it takes to stop him, Valentina said firmly. I've been someone's mistress, and I've hurt an innocent woman by believing a liar's version of her story. I can't undo that damage, but I can make sure Jacob doesn't get the chance to do this to anyone else. They sat in silence for a moment. Two women who should have been enemies, brought together by the man who had betrayed them both. There's something else, Valentina said finally. Something you should know about Jacob's patterns. She looked up at her, waiting. He targets successful, confident women, she said. Women who have their own careers, their own money, their own identities. Then he systematically breaks them down until they're dependent on him for validation. You, me, the others, we were all strong, independent women before we got involved with him. The words hit Julia like a physical blow. She hadn't been weak or pathetic when Jacob chose her. She'd been strong. Her brokenness wasn't a character flaw. It was the result of deliberate psychological manipulation. Why does he do it? She asked. Valentina's smile was bitter. Because powerful women intimidate him. So he finds ways to make us less powerful, less confident, less threatening. He gets off on the control, on turning strong women into shadows of themselves. As Julia left the coffee shop with the flash drive in her purse, she felt something shifting inside her. The shame she'd been carrying, the belief that she'd somehow brought this on herself by being weak or inadequate, was beginning to dissolve. Jacob hadn't targeted her because she was broken. He'd targeted her because she was strong, and then he'd worked systematically to break that strength. The pathetic woman he described in his voice memo wasn't her true self. It was his creation, his crime, his responsibility. And now she had the evidence to prove it. 3 days later, Jacob's world collapsed entirely. Julia woke up to her phone buzzing with notifications, news alerts, social media mentions, text messages from people she hadn't heard from in years. The story had broken overnight, and it was bigger than she'd ever imagined. Next Tech Solutions co-founder arrested on multiple charges, read the headline from the Seattle Times. Local tech executive faces embezzlement, fraud, and domestic violence allegations. The article was comprehensive and damning. It detailed not just the financial crimes, but the pattern of abuse and manipulation that had affected multiple women. Valentina had gone on record, as had two of the other women Jacob had been involved with. The investigators' evidence was airtight, and the financial crimes were documented with bank records and company emails. But the most satisfying part was a quote from James Rodriguez, who had been cooperative with the investigation once he realized the scope of Jacob's deception. Next Tech Solutions has zero tolerance for unethical behavior of any kind, he said. Mr. Davis's actions are completely contrary to our company values and have violated the trust of our employees, investors, and clients. We are fully cooperating with law enforcement and have terminated all business relationships with Mr. Davis effective immediately. Jacob had been arrested at 6 a.m. that morning at Valentina's apartment, where he'd apparently been staying since Julia left him. The irony wasn't lost on her. He'd been caught while hiding with one of his victims, both of them now working together to ensure he faced justice. Her phone rang, and she saw it was Carmen calling. "Julia, holy shit," her friend said without preamble. "I just saw the news. Are you okay? Are you safe?" "I'm better than okay," she said, and she meant it. "I'm free." The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, depositions, and media requests. Julia found herself at the center of a story that resonated far beyond Seattle's tech community. Her decision to speak up had encouraged other women to come forward, not just about Jacob, but about other men who had used similar tactics of psychological manipulation and financial control. The case against Jacob was overwhelming. The embezzlement charges alone carried a potential sentence of 10 years, and when combined with the domestic violence and fraud charges, he was looking at spending the next 15 to 20 years in prison. But the most satisfying moment came during the sentencing hearing, when Julia was given the opportunity to address the court. She stood at the podium in a navy blue dress that made her feel powerful, looking directly at Jacob for the first time since she'd left their apartment. He looked smaller somehow, diminished in his orange jumpsuit, no longer the intimidating figure who had once made her flinch. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Jacob Davis systematically destroyed my sense of self over the course of 2 years. He used psychological manipulation, physical violence, and emotional abuse to turn me into someone I didn't recognize. He made me believe that I was worthless, pathetic, deserving of his treatment." She paused, seeing Jacob shift uncomfortably in his seat. But he made one crucial mistake. He underestimated my capacity to heal, to remember who I really am, and to fight back. His abuse didn't make me weak. It made me determined to ensure that no other woman would suffer what I suffered. She talked about the other victims, about the financial crimes, about the web of lies and manipulation that had affected so many lives. "Jacob Davis is not a man who made mistakes under stress," she concluded. "He is a predator who systematically targets strong women and destroys them for his own gratification. He deserves every day of the sentence you're about to impose, not as revenge, but as protection for the women he would victimize if he were free." Jacob received 22 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. As the bailiff led him away, he looked back at her one final time. But instead of the broken woman he'd expected to see, he saw someone he'd never encountered before. Julia Castellano as she truly was, strong and unbreakable and absolutely done with letting anyone else define her worth. 6 months after Jacob's sentencing, Julia's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. She was sitting in a corner booth at a high-end restaurant in downtown Seattle, wearing a red dress that made her feel confident and beautiful, waiting for a man who had entered her life at exactly the moment she was ready for something real. His name was Alexander Blackwood, and he was everything Jacob had never been. Successful without being arrogant, powerful without being controlling, interested in her strength rather than intimidated by it. She'd met him at a conference for entrepreneurs 3 months earlier, where she'd been speaking about her experience starting a consulting firm that helped abuse survivors rebuild their professional lives. The foundation she'd established with the settlement money from her divorce had grown rapidly, and she'd found herself in demand as a speaker and advocate. Alexander had approached her after her presentation, not with the usual pickup lines she'd grown accustomed to, but with genuine questions about her work and obvious respect for what she'd accomplished. "I've been following your story," he'd said, and she'd tensed, expecting either pity or morbid curiosity. Instead, he'd continued, "What you've built from such a difficult experience is remarkable. You've turned trauma into purpose in a way that's truly inspiring." He was a venture capitalist who specialized in funding companies started by women and minorities, and he'd been looking for someone to help him develop better screening processes to ensure the founders he backed were ethical leaders who treated their employees well. "I don't want another Jacob Davis situation on my portfolio," he'd said bluntly. "I want to work with people who build others up, not tear them down." Their professional relationship had evolved into personal dinners, long conversations about their shared values, and eventually into something that felt like the beginning of real love. Alexander was successful, worth over $50 million from his various investments and business ventures. But more importantly, he was kind. He listened to her opinions and asked follow-up questions. He celebrated her successes without trying to diminish them. He treated her like an equal partner in every conversation and decision. When she'd told him about Jacob, about the abuse and the aftermath, he'd listened without judgment and without trying to fix her or treat her like she was damaged goods. "You're not a victim," he'd said. "You're a warrior who fought back and won." That's incredibly attractive to a man who values strength and courage. Now, as she waited for him to arrive for their dinner celebrating her foundation's first anniversary, she reflected on how completely her life had changed. The woman Jacob had tried to create, pathetic, dependent, broken, no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger than she'd ever been before, someone who had learned that she could survive anything and that her worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Running 5 minutes late. Traffic downtown is insane. Can't wait to celebrate with you tonight." She smiled, remembering how different her relationship with her phone used to be. With Jacob, every delayed text had been a source of anxiety, every late arrival a trigger for self-doubt. Now, it was just information, communicated respectfully by someone who valued her time. When Alexander arrived, he kissed her cheek and handed her a small wrapped box. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it and find out," he said with a smile. Inside was a delicate necklace with a phoenix pendant, its wings spread in flight. "I saw it and thought of you," he said as he helped her put it on. Someone who rose from the ashes stronger and more beautiful than before. As they talked over dinner about her foundation's expansion plans, about the book she was writing, about their upcoming trip to Italy, Julia caught her reflection in the restaurant's window. The woman looking back at her was radiant, confident, completely at peace with who she was. Jacob had tried to destroy her, and in a way, he had succeeded. The naive woman who had once sought his approval, who had allowed him to define her worth, who had accepted his version of reality over her own, that woman was gone. But in her place had risen someone infinitely more powerful. Someone who knew her own value, who refused to accept less than she deserved, who had turned her pain into purpose and her trauma into triumph. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "Just remembering," she said. "Remembering who I used to be and appreciating who I've become." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I love who you've become," he said, "and I'm grateful every day that you survived what you did, because it led you to me." As they walked out of the restaurant together, Julia felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. Not the desperate, dependent attachment she'd mistaken for love with Jacob, but something deeper and more sustaining. A relationship built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared values. Jacob Davis was spending his days in a prison cell, cut off from the world he'd tried to manipulate, facing the consequences of every cruel choice he'd made. Meanwhile, she was building a life more beautiful and meaningful than anything she'd ever imagined possible. Some betrayals do cut so deep they carve out a new person entirely. But sometimes, that new person is exactly who the world needed them to be.